You need to move along, lady. We have important guests arriving, the hotel receptionist says as 84-year-old Margaret Sullivan fumbles with her old wallet at the five-star hotel check-in. The crowded lobby filled with military officers and dignitaries grows impatient. Someone whispers about confused elderly people wandering into the wrong places. Margaret's weathered hands brush against the small Navy cross hidden beneath her modest cardigan, a reminder of the night she saved 17 sailors from a burning destroyer in the Wider of the Night Pacific 78 years ago. What happens next will leave you speechless. If stories like Margaret's remind you why we must never forget our heroes, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments about a veteran who changed your life. Let's honor them together. Margaret had received the invitation 3 weeks ago. Navy Veterans Reunion Gala at the Grand Pacific Hotel. She almost threw it away, thinking it was a mistake. After all, who would remember a nurse from World War II? But something made her keep it. Maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was the hope that someone, somewhere, might remember what she had done all those years ago. The hotel lobby was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Marble floors reflected the light. And everywhere she looked, people wore dress uniforms covered in ribbons and medals. Margaret felt out of place in her simple blue dress and warm cardigan. She approached the reception desk, her small suitcase trailing behind her. The young woman behind the counter looked up with barely concealed annoyance. Ma single quote saying, "Are you lost?" the receptionist asked. The senior center is about 6 blocks down the street. I have a reservation, Margaret said quietly. Margaret Sullivan. The receptionist typed something into her computer, frowning. I don't see anything under that name. And honestly, this is a private military event. I think there's been some confusion. Behind Margaret, a group of younger officers in dress whites were growing impatient. One of them, a lieutenant commander, stepped forward. Excuse me, he said to the receptionist. We need to check in for the gala. Can you handle this situation later? The receptionist nodded quickly. Of course, sir. Ma'am, she said to Margaret, I really need you to step aside. These officers have priority. Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had been dismissed like this before, in hospitals. During the war, when male doctors assumed she was just another nurse who couldn't handle real responsibility. I received an invitation, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled out a crumpled envelope from her purse. The lieutenant commander glanced at it and smirked. Lady, anyone can print one of those. This is a serious military event, not a costume party. Other officers behind him started chuckling. Margaret's hands began to shake, not from age, but from the familiar feeling of being invisible, of being nothing in the eyes of people who should understand what service means. Look, the receptionist said impatiently, we have real veterans checking in tonight. Important people. Admirals, commanders, medal recipients. I can't waste time on every confused person who wanders in here. Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes. She had survived enemy fire, saved lives under impossible conditions, and served her country with honor. But right now, she felt like a foolish old woman who had made a terrible mistake. Maybe I should just go home, Margaret whispered. That would probably be best, the lieutenant commander said. Save yourself the embarrassment. The group of officers moved past her toward the reception desk. Margaret stood there, forgotten and invisible, clutching her small suitcase and feeling more alone than she had in years. But then something changed. The same steel that had carried her through burning ships and exploding medical tents began to rise in her chest. She turned back toward the group at the reception desk. Excuse me, Margaret said, her voice stronger now. The lieutenant commander turned around with an annoyed expression. Yes? You said this event was for real veterans and medal recipients. Margaret continued. Her hands had stopped shaking. That's right. People who actually served their country with distinction. Margaret reached into her cardigan and pulled out a small metal case. She opened it slowly, revealing a Navy cross with its distinctive blue and white ribbon. The lieutenant commander's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened as he stared at the medal. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice suddenly respectful. "I earned it," Margaret replied. December 7th, 1943. USS Hornet. The lobby around them began to grow quiet as other officers noticed what was happening. Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We were hit by enemy torpedoes off the Solomon Islands. The medical bay was on fire, and 17 wounded sailors were trapped below deck. The ship was taking on water and listing badly. The receptionist had stopped typing. Other guests in the lobby were turning to listen. The captain ordered all non-essential personnel to abandon ship," Margaret said. "But I couldn't leave those boys. They were too injured to move themselves, and they would have drowned or burned to death." The lieutenant commander stood frozen, staring at the Navy cross in Margaret's hands. "I made 4 trips into that burning compartment," Margaret continued. "The smoke was so thick I couldn't see anything. I had to feel my way along the walls, dragging sailors to safety one by one. The ship was going down, but I kept going back. By now, the entire lobby had gone silent. Every conversation had stopped. Every person was looking at the small, elderly woman holding the nation's second highest military decoration. On my last trip, the ceiling collapsed," Margaret said. "A beam hit me in the back and broke 3 ribs. But I still had Private Johnson on my shoulders. He was unconscious and bleeding badly. I crawled through that wreckage for what felt like hours until I got him to the evacuation point." Margaret looked around at all the faces staring at her. Young officers, hotel staff, other veterans. All of them seeing her completely differently than they had just minutes before. All 17 of those sailors survived, she said. They went home to their families, had children, lived full lives. That's worth more to me than any medal." The lieutenant commander's face had turned red. He looked down at his own chest, covered in ribbons and decorations, then back at Margaret's. "Simple Navy Cross. Ma'am," he said quietly. "I owe you an apology." "A huge one." Margaret closed the medal case and put it back in her cardigan. "You don't owe me anything. You just didn't know." "But that's no excuse," he replied. "I should have shown respect first and asked questions later." The receptionist stepped forward, her hand shaking as she typed on her computer. "Miss Sullivan, I found your reservation. You're in the Admiral's suite on the top floor. Complimentary, of course." "That's not necessary," Margaret said. "I just want a simple room." Ma single quotes, a deep voice said from across the lobby. Everyone turned to see a man in his 60s walking toward them. His uniform was covered in ribbons, and his shoulder boards showed the 4 stars of a full admiral. The crowd parted as he approached Margaret. When he reached her, he stood at attention and saluted. "Admiral Harrison," he said. "And you, ma'am, are exactly the kind of hero this reunion was created to honor." Margaret felt tears in her eyes, but this time they weren't from embarrassment or sadness. They were from something she hadn't felt in decades: recognition. "Admiral." "I'm just an old nurse," she said. "No, ma'am," he replied. "You're a Navy Cross recipient who saved 17 lives under enemy fire. You're exactly who belongs at this gala." He turned to address the entire lobby. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Margaret Sullivan." Petty Officer Sullivan served as a combat medic in the Pacific Theater. Her actions on December 7, 1943, saved 17 sailors and demonstrated the highest traditions of naval service. The lobby erupted in applause. Officers saluted. Hotel staff clapped. Other veterans stepped forward to shake Margaret's hand and thank her for her service. The lieutenant commander, who had dismissed her earlier, approached with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm ashamed of how I treated you. You're everything I hope to be as an officer." Margaret smiled at him. "You're young. You'll learn that heroism doesn't always look the way you expect it to, Dodd," as the crowd began to disperse. Admiral Harrison offered Margaret his arm. "Shall we get you checked in properly? And I hope you'll allow me the honor of escorting you to dinner tonight." Margaret took his arm and smiled. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not just in what she had done during the war, but in standing up for herself when it mattered most. That evening, Margaret sat at the head table next to Admiral Harrison. When he introduced her to the assembled veterans, the entire ballroom rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes as she looked out at the sea of faces applauding her. Margaret thought about those 17 sailors she had saved so long ago. She wondered if they ever knew that the small, quiet nurse who had risked everything to save them would spend decades being invisible, forgotten, and dismissed. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she was finally seen for who she truly was, a hero who had served her country with honor and courage. When it mattered most, the Navy Cross in her cardigan seemed to glow a little brighter as she smiled and waved to the crowd, finally receiving the recognition she had always deserved.